3 is a long way off.
Yeah.
2 is insane.
You feeling
I feel like everyone feels like whatever they're doing, it's like somehow they are able to do it. The person who has 1 or 2 or 5 it's insane. Do you think I was saying
I think that's right.
Right.
Yeah,
There's
but
always
they
a
also
bigger
manage.
thing.
They also somehow figure it out.
All right.
Once you have them, there's no choice. You have to
Well, I think the biggest difference is that most of their wives, I think, stay at home moms. Like whenever I talk to my wife,
How do they
about
work
how
that
much-
out? Like,
Right.
It's just one person. Like, how do you change it?
I tried saying that
same time
with
as
one child, or Seika, now
Whenever I complain to my wife about the way I grew up, and I go, little my dad did, diapers and cleaning. My wife's like, it doesn't fly. She's like a different era. Yeah. The way us as mono-orthodox dads are like, I'd say we're 40-60. I'm definitely not 50-50. My wife does more than me, but I'm doing a lot of stuff. My dad did nothing. Got away with murder. He wasn't around ever.
But I see certain
I think I'm actually being recorded. My dad, I love you. If you're watching, Mom, I respect you more. But Dad, I appreciate you taking care of us financially. It says there's no one on except for me. So actually, someone just got off. Maybe that was my dad. In a fit of rage, he just signed up. Okay, everyone, so good to see you guys. Sorry for not making a public conversation, but okay. So let's jump into our learning. So we've been discussing a lot of different shiurim about trying to understand authorship and genre of Tehillim. Tonight is a cool night. We're kind of gonna head to I don't want to say the finish line. We have a lot of really interesting sources, but we're gonna start to hone in on wrapping up this mini series. If people enjoyed it, maybe we can consider doing. There might be room for one other shiur. We could also look through individual prakim, but this is more the approach we've been taking thus far is kind of looking at Tehillim more from a bird's eye view. So we'll continue in that vein with one parak of Tehillim that we're going to jump into a little bit at the end tonight. Okay. So just to recap, I think if I had to summarize the shitot which we've already approached, we talked about Sadi Gon saying Tehillim is all nivuot, all prophecies. We had Ibn Jikatila, who was some person living 100 years before Ibn Ezra, who said that they are really just poetry and tefillot that were written by people after events that took place, no prophetic angle. Ibn Ezra said there was a what we call prophetic anticipation, which is in religious terms we call it was written with ruach hakodesh, not nevuah. Those are the 3 major opinions that we've kind of discussed over the course of the last couple of weeks. Tonight we're going to see the Malbim, what I really like about the Malbim, who's more of a relative, more contemporary approach, is that we haven't yet got to approaches which is who says explicitly calls Tehillim the way we are using Tehillim in modern times. We've seen the Rishonim, we've seen more intellectual conversations. Who wrote it? What genre? How was it written? We've had no one who've said the way we are using Tehillim, that we use it in an Eis Sarah, we use it for private. We want to daven in a very private way, not in the context of tefillah. We haven't seen anyone say that. So the Malbim was the first person that I saw just say it, kind of categorize Tehillim the way I think that we experience Tehillim in our modern experience. So, yeah.
So did we mention Malbim last week?
No, this is new.
Towards the end, I feel like we were starting to talk it sounded familiar.
So towards the end, we talked about Ibn Ezra said that they were written as tefillot. Maybe that's what you're referring to. Written as tefillot, that maybe with prophetic anticipation that they were written kind of use this tefillah at some point down the future. That was the Ibn Ezra. We didn't quote the Malbim, I don't think. I knew the Malbim was my one more new approach I wanted to say. Actually, I wanted to look. I meant to look it up today. Let's look it up because that's not his name. He has a. My Rebbe Schachter used to say, his mother didn't call him little Malbimla. Right? He has a name, a proper Jewish name. Let's see. His name is Remeir Leibish ben Yechiel Michel Wisser. He lived in the 19th century, good 1809 to 1879. Again, my Rebbe Schachter, there was a book of drashot that was kind of written in honor of Rebbe Schachter, and the title of the book was called "His Mother Didn't Call Him Little Jacob." His mother didn't call him Rebbe. right? He has a first name. Rabbi Shack would always impress upon us rabbis that we should teach the Baal Matan that rabbis are people and they had a name and their name wasn't Itziv or their name wasn't Rashi. There was something. There was a name behind it. Itziv is actually a bad example because that is Naphtali Tzvi Huber. But most people, the Truma Sadesh and Chassam Sofer, they actually had a proper name. They were called up to the Torah, and when they were being put in timeout, their mother called them something else. Okay. So the Mab again, Rav Meir Leibish Ben Yechiel Wisser, who lives in the 19th century. Listen what he says. He says two really, really interesting things. The first thing is actually what I liked about this first source is he addresses biblical criticism. We talked in the earlier shirim how Rasai Go may have been responding to a polemic with the Karaites. What I knew in the 19th century, in the world of enlightenment, one of the challenges that was taking place was biblical criticism. What was the biblical criticism? So one of the major claims was that our tradition says that David HaMelech composed all of Sefer Tehillim. We talked about an earlier shirim that one of the prakim that has captured a lot of our attention is Parak Kuf Lamed Zayin 137, which is Al Naro Bava, which talks about the Ole Bavel, those who are part of the Galut, who the Levim were there on the riverbanks in Babylonia after Churban Abayis, and they were told by their captors, play some music for us. Let's see some of those jams that used to play in your temple. Let's hear your tunes. And the Levim were kind of lamenting how sorrowful and it was like an Echa type of term. That's Imesh Kachech Yerushalayim. That's from Kuf Lamed Zayin. So that parak is complicated because it doesn't fit with David HaMelech writing, because David HaMelech was 500, 600 years before that event occurred. Okay, so the biblical critics say, Raya, that you guys are making up stuff. It doesn't make any sense. That's the biblical, one of the takes of the biblical criticism. Listen to what the Mama says. He says, let's start on the third line. V'katavti zot, I'm writing this treatise, actually his Hakdama, his introduction to his work on Tehillim. L'golme alenu tainos hamal igim lemor, eich itachem b'yemei David, ba'od malchut al takva v'Yisrael al matam, ba'od lo nigzer gzeira. He's saying, I want to write this treatise to respond to those who mock our Torah and say, how could David HaMelech, while he's still the Melech, while his kingdom is still vibrant, and the Gzeira has been happened, the decree hasn't yet occurred to have a Churban Abayit. The Beis Hamikdash, it hasn't even been built yet, let alone been destroyed, because David doesn't even see the Beit HaMikdash. So the Gzeira hasn't goes there because the sins haven't happened to warrant destruction. The Kfar Sharu al Aduchan Bitul Hamalchut, the Galut Tzidkiyahu, B'Simon Peitat, and there are prakim which allude to Galut. How could it be? David could not have written such events. The Yeshiva Tam al Naro Bavel, Kilatam at Bavel, at Bnei Adom, Asher Olo Chatu, and cursing out Babylonians who haven't yet done anything wrong. Lo Hirshu, the Kadoma Eila Taino. So he's actually, what's interesting, the Malv in the 19th century is writing his Perush with the backdrop is biblical criticism, which is a little more contemporary for us. He says, Akim Pirash Nithia Pshat, Listom Pehama Orim Vanogfim. I'm coming back to defend against those who are attacking us. He goes on to say, because Chazal, Balbasher, we've seen this Gemara a number of times, say that all these different authors helped write Tehillim. So the bold he says, Ein Hechach Shaya Kol B'mei David. You don't have to say that everyone lived in David's time. Ki Kol Od Shaita Nevuah B'Yisrael Ad Chotam HaNeviim, as long as there still were Nevi'im alive, which is the last of the Nevi'im is Malachi, who he says that Ezra. Malachi is, he says Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. He says that is Ezra, which is somewhat of a news to me. I didn't necessarily know that, but Malachi says that's Ezra. Hayatzinor patuach v'alvim ashorim chaz b'ruach Hashem. People are, tzinor patuach means the ability to receive nevuah is open. God is still speaking to man. There's this idea of Ruach HaKodesh, Divrei Kodesh, ad Ezra, Shechatam Kisvei HaKodesh, Me'az lo nosef aleim davar. Until Ezra, until the end of Nevi'im, Hashem is still communicating in a more direct, more direct way with man. And as long as that's happening, the book has not yet been fossilized and canonized. The book is still a working document. This is pshat. This is cool. He says, and my goal is to prove there are people who are attacking us. They're saying biblical criticism. They're saying your Kisvei Kodesh are not really Kodesh because it makes no sense, because David could have written something that he didn't experience. And he's basically saying our Masorah is David was the main author. He wrote the most of them. He compiled a lot of them, but it was an open working document until the days of Ezra, and that it can explain how we get to Bavel with Prakim that are written way after David lived. So he's not reciting Gomer. He's not saying that David wrote with prophecy. He's taking, which is, I think, the Ibn Ezra, Ibn Chikatila route, that these historically were written over time. Fine, that's his approach. And he says he's writing this to say, hold your horses, biblical critics. It's okay. We have a tradition. But then he goes on to say, Ulam etzlenu emuna omein. Once he says, I have like a rational pshat answer for the biblical critics, which is that Tehillim was kind of written over time. Then he says, for those of us of faith, for those who are believers, I also want you to know the following. He says, Shivim Panam Torah, there are multiple truths in Torah. Jewish, Remez, Kabbalah, different approaches. And he says, Kol mizmor halal kfar tzafu michsa neviim amashorim b'nei korach asap b'mei David hayu genuzim etzfunim b'yad anshe ruach dor dorat etchi yata davar el poel. It's not so crazy for those of us who believe to also hold within our emunah that it could be that David and Melech already had a nevuah, or there were people prior to the event taking place who already had Ruach HaKodesh, and they were given Ruach HaKodesh, a foreshadowing what was to come. That's within our Masorah. But the works were hidden. They wouldn't have been published before they made sense in real time, which is a really cool idea. So now, not only in the first paragraph, he said, in my class, my course, I'll teach in YU, I will teach those who are studying biblical criticism that we have a very rational approach, that it was a working document over time. But now he kind of takes a little bit of a detour and says, but for those of us who are believers, it's not so crazy to say that David had some sort of foresight to what was going to take place after him. And that's what we believe, that they may have been aware of it, certain individuals, but it wasn't revealed. It wasn't a sefer you could pull off the shelf until it actually transpired, which is a nice insight. And he goes on to say, and don't ask how they could have sung in David's time, that David was aware of this singing on Nara Baba, the Risha Baba and the Iba Baba, but Olo Yitzpeh, Lepulat Adam, Lo Nigzer Gzer, before anything was decreed or anything happened. Lots of our tradition has the idea of Nivuah. What's Nivuah? That there's some sort of foresight of what's going to happen. Okay, so then he goes on to restate that from a plot perspective, it was an open document until it happened. From a drash or a kind of a Sod Remez perspective, this is what he how he explains it. That Nivuah, the fact that some knew, but it wasn't, let's say, a book on the shelf for the Hamonah, would be the David and Mouse, the Nevi'im. There were people who knew of what was to come, but before it even happened. Okay, so that's the Mab's first. Really, I think that's just a nice summary of a different take in terms of authorship that probably is more aligned with probably how many of us probably started this whole show with that kind of guess. That's kind of a little more irrational approach. So, now Mappam talks about theme and thematic. What is Tehillim? Okay, any comments on that first hour? Okay, the second thing is really beautiful. That what I just read to you was actually a ha'ara. This is his real hakdama. I actually didn't find this in that piece I just read you. I had to really search for it because I saw it referenced. I couldn't find it in Ala Torah, but I found it in Bar Ilan. So it was clearly like a footnote almost, but I thought it was cool. Now he has his hakdama. The way he starts the hakdama, which is an introduction to Sefer Tehillim, so he's trying to capture the essence of the Sefer because he's writing an introduction to the book. He says, Beit that I'm in source to, Beit Kodesh Kadashim, Beit Otzer Yakar Zeh. We are about to open this such a beautiful way. This book, this house of a holy of holies, this house of an Otsar, almost like a treasure chest, Hayakar Zeh, this beautiful, precious work that we're about to start learning. Mala Yakar Kol Kodesh, it's full of gems of Kedusha. Mala Hadar Kol Kavod Va'oz, beautiful splendor and glory. Otsar Betocho Kol Machmadenu Shahayu Lanu Mekedev. And what's in it, within this book that we're going to study together, we're going to learn together, all the unbelievable things, all these precious gems are going to be found there. It goes on to say, the next line, The underline, Hechlo, Kavodo Merkulo. In his temple, he said all these honorable things, Tilot, Tfilot, Shirot, Zmirot, Abnechefetz, Peninim, all these different types of gems, songs, and praises and prayers. Shoam, Yakar, Matzmonim. Again, he's just very verbose of his praise for how beautiful this Sefer is. Okay? And then he goes, let's go, and he says it's written by David HaMelech. He says Mashiach, where is it? Mashiach Hashem? Somewhere he says Mashiach Hashem. Talks about Hashem, David HaMelech being the author. And then look in the next paragraph in the bold. It says Bain. Starts at the bottom of page 1, Bain. So David HaMelech wrote these prakim. He says, Bain asher hitpalel atzmo. Whether some of the prakim he wrote as a prayer about his own life. Bain asher hitpalel ala klal. Some of these tefillot were prayers he wrote for the Jewish people. Sometimes there was something unique that was happening in his life that he was praying for. Or whether he was just always in a state of prayer. We can daven just while we're working, while we're jogging, while we're driving. We can always be praying to God, talking to God. It says, Kol Ela Asaf v'chiber le'et ziknuto. All these psalms David compiled and were authored towards the end of his life when he was older. So first of all, it says that he gathered, which means he could have been taking prayers that he knew from Adam, prayers he knew from Moshe, prayers that, remember we said there were 10 other authors, some of them predate David HaMelech. So here the Malbim is kind of giving space for prakim, psalms that predate him. But he says when he was older, he was chiber v'asaf seichem yuchad shayu muchanim letzorech hanhagat hamit boded. I wrote this book for the lonely person, for the person who is mit boded, which usually we talk mit boded, I think is like the person of solitude. Kol adam yachazebo, that every person should look in it and find kol tefillah, kol tchina, every praise, every request, kol hodah, every thanks, kol tilah, every prayer, kol davra, kol inyan. Whatever you're looking for, whatever words you're trying to say to God, it's all there. Sukkah, whether you're in a strait, ochua, or you have a salvation. Tzara, a bad thing, revacha, or you just got a promotion. Asher yel yachid olaram, whether you're an individual or a rabbi. Betaluchot ha'itim, whether it's about the future, b'sibo azman as-soar, or things that are catastrophes, stuff going on. Kol over yam achayim b'amon mishmara v'shon gel. Whatever waves you're riding, David has written prayers and stuff for you. There's also some special gems that are hidden. They're medical advice and things that can heal. And the keys to heaven are there. So beautiful. So Malbim basically is saying this is a work which is so precious and everything's in it. And the way he describes it is, it was gathered a book of prayers that David wrote for us to say, it says everything. You can take this book and you can really go and whatever words you're trying to find, you can find in your life, whatever you're experiencing in the wave and the roller coaster of life, you can find it. So to me, this is a cool source that I found because I think this is how we were taught what Tehillim is. But I just never seen like a Rishon or someone like kind of say it. Everyone that we've seen so far really hasn't said it so clearly and crisply. So the Malbim is the one who it could be others said it before him, but he said it's a beautiful lashon that Tehillim is the book of everything you want. Which again leads us back to the original question we started this whole mini series on, which is okay. So then why don't we just say Tehillim all day long? And why do we daven? So I'm taking your comment. One question. So what I want to do now that we've kind of wrapped up our discussion of all the main approaches to authorship and genre and themes is now go back and see a little bit more. Go back to our original question with an eye of kind of wrapping things up and really honing in on multiple answers, not just for Sad Yagon, but even within the approaches, some new insights of why Shemona Esrei was created and not just Tehillim. Why was there was a need to create Shemona Esrei that was not just Tehillim? Yeah.
It sounds like you maybe are going to answer it coming up. But it sounds like the Malbim saying Tehillim is like a book of prayer. And so I feel like without further explanation, I would say that's not how we're treating it. We're treating it as like in times of certain, I hear book of prayer, I'm like, so that should be, like what the Karite said, like that should be our book of prayer. It sounds like they would agree with the Malbim, but I think we use it as like certain situations when we need certain requests and not as a general book of prayer, because like we have our sitter. We don't, we're not going to show, but we're at the Tehillim. Some could in certain times, but I don't know, just the Malbim at face value, I feel like
would fit with the Karaites.
Yeah, and like I would think it's like not the opinion, like that's not how we really view it. We view it like we use it when we need it for tefillah, but like to say like, oh, it's like a book of tefillah, I would think we like that's a question you that we still have of why don't we use it more?
Correct. I think we still need to sharpen.
Right. So I think this next section will maybe answer. Like,
I was machaving to Adam's question. Okay, I'm on you. Yeah.
But is it spread all the way through the document anyway?
Yeah. So much. Yeah, correct. So much of Tehillim is we say prakim throughout. We say Hallel. The Halukas are all Tehillim. The Shir Shayoms, I think a lot of the Shir Shayoms are Tehillim.
But it's an amalgam also in various prayers.
And so good. So one of the approaches is going to be, well, it's not so far off. So there are two approaches we're going to give. We're going to give multiple approaches, but yes, one of them is going to see that is going to address what Alan's getting at. But even within aside from your approach, you can still ask, what about Shemona Esrei? Why did the rabbis come to create Shemona Esrei, which is not Tehillim? Shemona Esrei is totally rabbinic. The 1819 brachot are Anshe Kesagdol. That's different. Okay, but we are gonna one of the approaches going to address yours. Okay, great, excellent. Okay, so here's a deeper dive into the Rasaji Gon. Remember, Rasaji Gon said there was a polemic against the Karaites who felt that this should be the end all be all tefillah. But in that book, Uriel Simon's book, he takes it a step further. There's a medrash in Tehillim and source 3 that says that's comparing Moshe and David HaMelech. And if you look in the middle of that paragraph, the whole paragraph is actually just comparing Mihu Meshubach Shenavim, Meshubach Shemalachim, who's the best of the Nevi'im, is the best of the greatest of the kings. Meshubach Shenavim is a Moshe, Meshubach Me'alachim is a David. The best Navi was Moshe, the best of the kings. If we had a ranking, right? ESPN likes to have a top 10, top 10 everything, top 10 whatever. So we have top 10 of kings, top 10 of Nevi'im. The Medrash says it's Moshe and David stands on the top. Within this Medrash, which is comparing Moshe and David, it says Zaykriv and Zaykriv. Each one brought their book. Moshe natan lem chamisha Moshe Torah ukenedem natan lem David sefer Tehillim sheish bo chamisha sfarim. So I'm not a Tehillim zugger. Maybe I will become more after I've learned all about Tehillim now. But there are actually 5 books of Tehillim. The 100 of the Prakim are broken down to 5 different books. So there is a parallel the Medrash seems to suggest between Chamisha Chumshei Torah and the Chamisha Chumashim of Tehillim. Based on this, look at the handout. This is now page 1011 on the handout in Rav Sadia going. So this is in Simon's piece. He says, look at the bottom left of it's hard to see the pages. It's page 5 in your packet. I didn't name it. It should say 10 and 11. Sadia Gon, the book of Psalms, the second Pentateuch. Yeah, I should have paginated it. I probably didn't paginate it. Look at the bottom left. He says, this endeavor to bring spiritual proofs. You see right on the bottom left there? This endeavor to bring spiritual proofs that the book of Psalms is inadequate to fill all facets of prayer. And also the liturgical composition began before David. It seems parallel Sadia's well-known assertion that the terse of Scripture proves it was complemented ab initio by the oral law. This is cool. It says, the truth ever is that Sadia was much more radical than this adversary of the Karaites. He was not interested simply in finding justification for supplementing biblical prayer with liturgical prayer, an issue on which the Karaites eventually agreed with him, just as they recognized that their own oral tradition, I don't know what this is, the Sevel HaYerusa, apparently the Karaites had some sort of, they did have an oral tradition, as complementing the Torah. Rather, Rav Sadia's stage of frontal assault against the very charge of perversion, according to which rabbinic prayer had usurped the place of scriptural prayer. The Karaites were saying that this is a breach of the Masorah. How can rabbis write prayers? To this indictment, he had a clear answer. The Psalms were never intended to serve as a prayer book for Israel, while the liturgy handed down by the sages, meaning primarily the Amidah, is not only of ancient origin, but was even ordained by the prophets. This unyielding position is clearly expressed in his introduction to his Siddur. So Rav Saadia Gaon is a quote in his introduction to his Siddur. He says, since the Jews' prayers and benedictions to the Lord are not formulated in Scripture, just as many of the laws and commandments are not explicated therein, he who ordained them made us dependent upon the tradition enunciated by his prophets. Those passages in Scripture that sound like prayer cannot be prayer, in truth, since they are juxtaposed with commandments, admonitions, promises, and threats in every chapter. And reason dictates that none of these can be incorporated into prayer, as we have explained the proof for prayer. In both prayers and benedictions, they depend on the tradition handed down by the prophets of the Lord. They had two rituals, one for the era of monarchy, the other for the exile. In this way, Saadia enveloped the perversion argument on both flanks. The prayers we recite are not our own innovation, since, like the oral law, they've been handed down to us in a reliable tradition going back to the prophets. By contrast, the Psalms, which the Karaites employ in their prayer, were never intended to be used in that way, as their style makes clear. Hence, Saadia, who viewed the books of Psalms as God's word to man, could never have entered into a dispute about the exclusive liturgical status of the Psalms. Nor, okay, I don't think we have to read that part. But the point, what do you think? What do you think he's getting at over here? But Angel makes it actually pretty clear by using this midrash I just read to you. There's a polemic here that Rav Angel says that, and Simon I think says it here also, is that Rav Saadia Gaon wasn't just worried that there was a specific debate between the Karaites and rabbinic Jewry. The debate is, should Tehillim be our siddur or should the rabbis write a siddur? He said more than just that, there was a greater debate over the role of Torah Shebaal Peh. Remember, the Karaites believe wholeheartedly in Torah Shebichtav. They only believe in the Kedusha or the sanctity of the written Torah. They don't believe in the oral tradition. So all of the Gemara, anything rabbinic to them is not, they're not beholden to it. Rav Saadia Gaon in kind of almost taking a pretty outlandish position that we said no one else seems to hold. According to Professor Simon, and Rabbi Angel echoes this also, was making a bigger stand for rabbinic Judaism by basically saying that just like Tehillim is a Torah Shebichtav, there's a Torah Shebaal Peh. You can't understand Tehillim. It's poetry. It's terse. The Torah Shebaal Peh is what the rabbis are going to give us. This is not meant to be the end-all be-all. This is only the Bichtav. You Karaites don't believe in Torah Shebaal Peh. But you know what the Torah Shebaal Peh is? It's called Tefillah. It's called what Anshe Knesset do. It's called the Siddur. The Siddur is going to be Ki'ilu, the more explained, more vernacular. It's a little more, we can make, again, I know the Siddur is still, it's hard for us as English speakers, but it's a little more understandable what's going on in the Siddur versus Tehillim, which is really poetry and really hard to decipher what Psalms are because they're so disjointed and there's a lot of themes and they start with one theme. So according to Professor Simon, I think he's a professor, I don't know, but the author of this book, he says that Rav Saadia Gaon had a much bigger, felt a lot more heat from the Karaites, and that propelled him to take a more outlandish approach. It's not just about do rabbis have the ability to write prayer, it's it's what role does Torah Shebaal Peh have? And if you just had Tehillim, then all you have is Torah Shebichtav, and that gives off an impression that the Karaites have some standing. So it was a much bigger polemic according to this, which I not shared with you until tonight. Thoughts?
Do we have a
reactions?
Masorah of what the Avos said? That we give them Shabbos and Tomorrow? No, there's no Masorah.
As far as I know, that'd be very cool if we had like their siddur,
Or what they, anything that they said.
wasn't a siddur, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a great question.
Siddur keeps getting bigger and bigger for each other.
I read it really easy. Yeah. Yeah.
You would have thought it's a little bit different, but I thought it still fits in very nicely because it shows the power of the beauty of Tehillim. Rabbi
6 years ago on Rosh Hashanah, there was a crossing guard who was not Jewish, who was very sadly hit by a car. And Rabbi Newberger stopped the entire Rosh Hashanah service, and he led the whole Kihilin to Tehillim for the non-Jewish crossing guard. And I was not yet a chaplain, but it made such an incredible impression on me to pray for all people and to have love for all people. And,
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I thought
Beautiful.
especially in, Eretz Yisrael right now in the horrific
Right.
sense, how,
Right.
So we see how beautiful Tehillim is, and to literally pray for one and all.
That's right. That's right. Okay. So this is, up until now, this is just a deepening of our understanding of Rav Saadia Gaon of, let's say, the original approach we gave, but now we've deepened it. It's a bigger polemic. It's a much bigger fight between the Karaites and Rav Saadia Gaon, which propels him to say Tehillim is not enough. If we just use Tehillim, you're basically denying the rabbinic role. You're denying the Torah Shabbat Peh role, the oral tradition. Tehillim was not meant to be everything. So that's kind of like a deepening of approach number one. Now, I want to share with you some new approaches that I came across. So this is going to come back to what Alan was just saying before about, when we say the Siddur really isn't Tehillim, well, maybe it is. There's a lot of Tehillim there. So this Rebbe Angel, or maybe I saw this in this previous paragraph here actually, points out to some sources throughout Tanakh, which talk about tefillot, that it wouldn't be, the question I guess we'll frame it is, would Tehillim be suffice? If we just had Tehillim, there's no Siddur, would that work for us? What am I talking about? There's a reference in Ezra, and in Ezra, King Daryavish makes a decree that they can rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. And in it, they find a scroll in which it references Cyrus the king. Apparently, Cyrus was the king when the attempt to rebuild the second Beis Hamikdash is ongoing. And in there's a pasuk that says, there's a scroll that's found, it's referenced in Sefer Ezra. And in pasuk Yud it says, when the Jews will rebuild their temple, they'll be able to pray to their God. They will daven for the life and the health and the well-being of King Daryavish and his sons. So one of the proofs that some want to say that Tehillim would not have been enough is their references to prayers for King Daryavish and his sons. But Daryavish was not mentioned in Sefer Tehillim. So if they're going to be in our Nevi'im or in our Ksuvim, there are references to prayers that will be recited. Now, it could be this is just the prayer for Medina, that we have these modern prayers for the Memshalah, which is alluded to actually in the Gemara and Mishnah. It's about like praying for your local government, your ruling Memshalah, not local, but the Memshalah. But one of the psukim alluded to is how could you? What parak of Tehillim would you take out if you just had Tehillim to work with? What would you take out if you're told you're supposed to daven for the king? David didn't write there is no tefillah that David wrote that's for praying for a king, maybe because he was the king. I don't know. There's just not. There isn't like a parak we could take out. That's one suggestion. There's another suggestion. There are prakim in Tehillim and psukim. Look at source 6. It says Shiru lo shir chadash, where David HaMelech himself says we should have a new song. That you should. I'm encouraging you, write new songs. So again, there's a reference in Tehillim for come up with new versions, add to the list of Tehillot. And then in Malachim is another reference where this one is definitely alluded to in this rabbinic polemic, which is on page 10 that we just read. There he says it's talking about what will happen when there'll be a rav, or there's a famine or a war. And it's talking about Hashem listens to all prayers. It says, Kol tefillah, Surah 7, Kol tefillah, Kol techina, asher tia l'chol ha'adam. Whatever prayer, whatever beseeching that any person will come up with, l'chol am Yisrael, any man amongst the Jewish people, asher yedun ish negel levavo, uparas kabbalah tabayis, and raises his hand in this house, Ata tishma shemayim, the heavens will listen. So this is another reference that says any prayer that any man will say. Wait a second. How could any man come up with a prayer if we're limited to David's prayers? Why would any man be ad-libbing or making up tefillot if David Melch, if we're bound by David's prayers? So, these are just a few different, very small rayas, few small supports, which seem to suggest that people are allowed to freestyle. We're allowed to be adding to our corpus of tefillot. Does that make sense? Why I'm showing you these psukim? And based on this, so Dat Mikra. So Dat Mikra is we have it in here. It's this work from Sadr of Cook. It's on all of Tanakh. Really, really comprehensive by Amos Chacham. I have more than my house. It's a pretty well known in many Sifriya. You'll see this. It's a very comprehensive Perush on Nevi'im. They have it on different Nevi'im and Ketuvim. So I put in your sheet a printout. He basically says, I'm just turning the page. This is the back side. At the bottom it says Mem Tet. Page 6 if you're counting from the beginning. And there he basically goes on to say, if you look where the arrow is in the middle, he basically says, Kasher Tiknu Chazal. You see the arrow there in the third paragraph there? When Chazal came up with Yemei Bait Sheni during the Second Temple period, at Matbea Tfilo, what the siddur looked like, he's addressing our question. They picked a new nusach, a new book, the siddur. It's not Tehillim. Why? Some say this is Sadia Gon. They want to distinguish between that which they said in the Beit Mikdash. Skip a few lines. Let's go to the line that starts. The first word is Chadashot. Then it says it's like 6 lines down there. What I think is more plausible is the following. It says Sheikar. It's to the right of where my thumb is, where it says Bayesheni. In the middle of that line where my thumb is. Right? I put my thumb there. It says Ikar Hatam Shechibru Chazat Tefillah Chadashot Hu Mishum Shelashon Mizmor Tilim Hilashon Shira Atika. The second reason why they wrote a siddur, which is not just Tehillim, is because the Tehillim was written with biblical Hebrew. It was old songs that were written with a prosaic or a prose that we aren't so familiar with. The Rabbi Me'ami Me'habayit Sheni Hitkashu Lavina, and many people Bayit Sheni didn't understand what Tehillim was, let alone us in 2023 that have trouble translating what Psalms is all about. V'chibru Chazal Tfiloteim B'lashon Pshuta Krova L'lashon Hadibur B'otayamim. When the siddur was written, it was meant to be more understandable and more in the vernacular of Hebrew that would be more readily understandable. Again, I recognize the siddur is still hard for many of us to understand, but it's a little more easier Hebrew than Tehillim, straight Tehillim. Kedei Shavinu, so we should understand the siddur. V'afa Pikein, and nonetheless, even though they made a new siddur that would be supposed to be a little more of the vernacular, Rov Divrei Tfilah Yusadim Apsukim Shebetehillim. This is what Alan is saying. When they wrote the siddur, they wrote it based on psukim from Tehillim. For Herech, Rabbi David Avud Raham, he basically, the Avud Raham, one of the commentators, also, you don't have exact data when he lives also, but Avud Raham says a very similar thing. That is essentially, approach number 2 is that the siddur is based off Tehillim. So whereas the question was, why do we need a siddur if we just have Tehillim, is that the siddur is supposed to be a little more palatable, a little more understandable work that is based off of Tehillim, based off of Mikra. Mikra needs to be the starting point of Tefillah. And the rabbis looked at the Mikra and Tanakh, and from that they used it as a springboard to create. And that's why there's so much Tehillim sprouted out throughout every prayer. There's Tehillim, except for Shemona Esrei, which is kind of ironic. What?
Are we going to get to that very exciting spot? Why Shemona Esrei?
Why Shemona Esrei? I have a little bit of What do you have something in mind?
No, I'm just asking, because, okay, so now we know that, okay, so there's still, there's those who say that's really prayers. It's not, but now we learn that it's interwoven.
Interwoven.
throughout.
Right.
But then, okay, so we have that, and suddenly Shemona Esrei also.
Okay.
So why?
Why should I- Okay.
And
So I have a good approach. So the question is, I have one more portion that will answer that. The question I have is just timing. So it's a little bit late already.
Yeah.
The question is, I have one other small thing that will connect to this. Then we could do one more share on this, and then we could do the last approach on Shemona Esrei next week or 2 weeks.
Right.
Next week's Thanksgiving. We do it in 2 weeks, or we could try to spend 15 minutes and go through. I almost feel like we should not rush it. Maybe we should. I'll do a shorter thing, and then in 2 weeks we'll wrap this up. Is that okay? It's looking a little bit late. Okay, so you'll have to hold. You have to come back one more time.
Then I have to come back.
You have to come back.
Yeah. The question, why?
The question.
You started.
The question is that we just gave a second approach that it's interwoven, but then Alan's still saying, but then why Shemona Esrei not interwoven? Why Shemona Esrei this new bria, this new kind of new entity that's not based on Tehillim? Okay. So let's answer that next time to have some cool sources that will address it next time. The last thing I'll share with you, which is actually not in your sources, I forgot to include it, is that even Shemona Esrei, so this is not in your sources, but even Shemona Esrei, let me bring it up on my sources because I found this today after I want to make sure I could print this year, so I printed it at like 2:00, but then I keep learning. And I found this. I got very excited. Okay, so this is the Gemara. Let me see if I can find the Gemara. This is a Gemara, and the Gemara basically is talking about the fact that every parak of Tehillim that starts with Ashrei and ends with Ashrei is like a really special one to David Melch. The Gemara, I think in Brachos or Pesach. Let me bring up the Gemara. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara then asks a question and says, we have this pasuk, Yihulu Ratzon Imrei Fi Ve'Agyon Lifanecha. You're familiar with it? We say at the end of our Shemona Esrei. And the Gemara says, why do we Yihulu Ratzon Imrei Fi Ve'Agyon Lifanecha means let the words that come out of my mouth be Imrei Fi. Let them be like words of entreaty, and let them be like sweet before God. So the Gemara is asked, trying the Gemara. Gemara Bracho, Tet Amabet, and Bracho. Hayu l'ratzon imrei fi, mashal vasof, mashal meikar. You could have said it in the beginning of Shemona Esrei. Why do we wait till the end? Why the last words of Shemona Esrei? I'm being very nuanced here. I'm not giving you the big answer. I'm giving you another hybrid answer. Why are the words you l'ratzon imrei fi, hagyon lifanecha, tzuri v'gali? Why do we end Shemona Esrei those words? They could have been a very nice Hashem society ftach. They could have been at the beginning. My time to Rabbanan la'achar Shemona Esrei. Why do it as our end of Shemona Esrei? Leim meikars. We're in bracho. So the Gemara answers, Hol v'lo amru David elo la'achar Shemona Esrei parshiot. Lefikach tiknu Rabbanan la'achar Shemona Esrei brachot. The answer to the Gemara is because we find that pasuk Yuluratz Imrei Fi Ve'Agyon Lefanecha Tzur V'Gali in the 19th chapter of Psalms. The rabbi said it should be at the end of Shemona Esrei because Shemona Esrei is 18 blessings. It's the Shemona Esrei. So then the Gemara says, wait a second, is it really 18 blessings? How did Shemona Esrei Tisha Esrei Havian? We know that the Shemona Esrei became the Tisha Esrei. We call it Shemona Esrei, but really they're 19 brachot because they added the Lam Hashinim. So the Gemara says, wait a second. Don't tell me that that doesn't make sense because there are actually 19 brachot blessings in Shemona Esrei. So the Gemara says, Ashrei Ish v'lama rag shugoyim chada parshi, Parak Aleph and Parak Bet of Tehillim are really one Chada Parshas. They're really one parak. And then the Gemara says, Mea v'shalosh Parsha Amar David, 103 prakim that David said. Okay, whatever. But he basically goes on to say that depending on how you break up Parak Aleph Bet, if you break them up, so then you get to 19 because you added one more. Why is this cool? Because what I think, once I saw this approach, I think you can add another answer. The other answer not only is not only is tefillah based on the words of Tehillim, but the Shemona Esrei itself, which Alan's asking about, the structure of Shemona Esrei is predicated and modeled after Tehillim. And we derive, where should you l'ratzon if he be? It should be the end of Shemona Esrei because we want to mirror Tehillim to some degree. And that's why it's at the end of Shemona Esrei because you l'ratzon refi appears in Tehillim Parak Yutet. It's a pasuk. Tehillim Yutet Tet Vav. You l'ratzon refi v'agilon l'fnecha Hashem tzuri v'goali. So there's this line as the end of Shemona Esrei to mirror the structure and the outline of Shemona Esrei. So there's another answer saying that Tehillim played a central role in literally how the rabbis modeled it. Next week when we come back, we'll give one other razzle dazzle approach to understand why they had to still come up with a novel tefillah, which is something new which you have not heard. Okay, so hopefully we'll do one more thing on this. Okay, we'll stop here. Okay, shkayach everyone. I want to thank Adam for getting us food. I really appreciate it. Shkayach for coming.
I like that last bit almost strengthens the question because it's like they clearly had influences from Tehillim, but like it makes it even more obvious that the text itself is not Tehillim. So it's like clearly they were aware of it; they're using it to model it. But then I think we said next week or in 2 weeks we'll see like why they actively didn't use the text.
Right. Excellent. Okay, guys, that we'll do it not next week because next week Thanksgiving we'll do 2 weeks. Hey, shkayach everyone. Good Shabbos. I'm not here for